My name is Ellen Kraft. I'm a recruiter at 3M in the Twin Cities. I've been in that role for 5 years now, and focus primarily in our internship and entry-level hiring for recent grads. I've worked with all of our corporate staff groups or our functions, so think of IT, marketing, sales, finance, and I'm focusing in right now on our research and development and information technology spaces, as well as our design space.
Excellent, thank you. Richard?
Sure. Good afternoon, I'm Richard Harris, and I am a recruiter at Mortenson, Construction and Engineering. I was at US Bank for 4 years before that, leading the college recruiting team there. So I went from recruiting finance and accounting students back in the day to now primarily engineers across the board throughout the country. We're doing some pretty cool stuff. US Bank Stadium, the new stadium where the Las Vegas Raiders play, a lot of fun stuff that we're doing. Really, really good to be here.
Excellent, thank you. And Brett?
Hi there. Excuse me, I'm Brett Lampy. I'm a talent acquisition director at CLA, or Clifton Larson Allen. We are a pretty large public accounting firm with offices spread all throughout the US. Specifically at CLA, I do a little bit more work on the experienced hire side of the house, but I have had involvement in a variety of different areas at the firm here. Have touched a little bit of everything. And you know, something that I'll mention quickly about the things I enjoy about interviewing other people. I think one of the biggest things for me is I really like understanding what people are most interested in doing moving forward and seeing how we can best line up what they're looking for with the opportunity that we have at CLA.
Excellent, thank you. And we're just doing introductions. Luciano, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello, my name is Luciano Guzman. I was a Wallen Scholar as well. I am currently working at an organization called Upturnships that I'm the program coordinator for. And, you know, we find college students that need internships, and we try to give them mentoring and the training on soft skill development to help them be successful in a higher paying internship opportunity. I also have worked a little bit in the tech recruiting world with a friend's recruitment agency. And one of the things that I like the most about interviewing people is getting to learn their story, learning to being able to get a little glimpse as to what they want in life and what goals they have, so that I can see how I can best help them reach them. Or if I know somebody that can connect them, that I can connect them to, that can help out as well.
Excellent, thank you. And so today's event is called The Question Behind the Question. And so what we want to hear from each of you as leaders within your organizations, as hiring managers, as individuals that are helping to evaluate what talent you're bringing into your organization, are what are the things you're looking for when you're asking questions of potential candidates. Really, what is the type of information you're looking for? What are the soft skills or things beyond the verbal, the nonverbal type of communication that you're looking for? We're looking to learn about that today. And so I would like to start by just asking, what does the hiring process look like at each of your organizations? Are there screening interviews? Are individuals typically meeting directly with hiring managers within a department? Or if we could just learn a little more about what that landscape looks like.
I'll start.
I can go first.
Go ahead, Ellen. Go ahead,
All
Ellen.
right, thanks. So with 3M, we break most of our student programs hiring into programs. And so the program leads in a lot of cases are hiring managers, and they're looking for pools of candidates versus filling a very specific position and then putting a candidate into that. So how we actually do that is we start off with our university relations teams, which are alumni at various universities, and they're doing the career fairs and the networking on campus and that sort of activity. They then bring back their recommendations to the program leads, who usually do a follow-up interview via phone. We don't typically bring in candidates for face-to-face interviews on the intern side. We do for the full-time. And then from there, we typically extend the offer on the intern side or bring them into that full-time or that face-to-face interview on the full-time side.
sorry, unmute myself here. At CLA, I would say we're probably somewhat similar to what Ellen and her teams do. You know, with that said, you know, for us being an accounting firm, we're traditionally looking for accounting students. So we're already pretty honed in on the type of folks that we're interested in. And for us, many times folks are going to go through kind of just an initial screening process to understand, you know, kind of where along the journey they are in terms of, you know, completing their accounting degree. Specifically for us, it's really important that someone is going to be able to sit and go for their CPA. So we want to understand where they're at in that process as well. But again, generally to begin with, you know, you're going to have initial screening. And then as we kind of gather groups of people, when we look to do kind of our big annual hiring events, we'll bring folks in. And then I guess I don't know how it looks, how everything will look with the pandemic and COVID now, but traditionally we brought in large groups of students, and they're going to have an opportunity to learn more about the firm, and then also start doing, you know, in-person, face-to-face interviews with multiple people within a variety of teams at the firm. So that way they get a chance to learn about different areas, and then also kind of go through the interview process at the same time. So again, that's pre-pandemic. That's obviously going to be changing slightly, probably to more video types of interviews and whatnot, but that is generally what that kind of initial process has looked like on our end.
So I'll kind of split the middle between the two of you who just spoke earlier, because on the one hand, we do have some team members who do go back to their schools to recruit students on the internship and full-time side. I will say on the internship side, it's pretty cut and dry where we have the initial screening followed by the interview. On the full-time side, we have the screening for about 5 to 10 minutes, sent on to another full-time team member to conduct the full-time interview. We do fly students in for those sessions. And like you mentioned earlier, we aren't going to be flying folks in this year. We're doing everything virtually, but we do generally bring in about 125 to 200 students every year on site to give them kind of the Mortenson feel, to help them understand what we're doing across the board. So we do delineate between internship and full-time. And the other difference I would say for us is we also recruit for the organization. Construction is kind of a weird field where I can't tell you the next project we're going to have necessarily next May or June. So we hire broadly for different skill sets, hoping that we, you know, pull down some pretty big jobs in the coming months. And then by the time we make the offer, we align students to a job around February of March for the next May or June season.
At Upturnships, we are a professional development kind of training program and mentorship program. So we do follow a cohort model. So the way that we are, you know, deciding those students is we're having volunteers and people that work with our organization very regularly do phone screens with students to make sure that they meet like different criteria that we kind of need to follow for whatever that recruitment cycle is. So I think a lot of times when you're looking at phone screens, it's making sure that you check the boxes so that the next kind of stages can happen. And then once you get through that phone screen, we provide professional development training around how to best interview, how to best prepare your resume. And then once you get through that process with our interview coach and then our resume coach, then you are put into kind of like an applicant pool where you will be applying to employers that we have relationships with. And then you would apply directly with that employer, which is why we're providing that training up front. You acquire that internship with them, and then we stay with you through that process. So it's going to be a little bit different because we're not the employer directly, but we're helping people kind of get there.
Excellent. Thank you each. And I think that's helpful and really important for all of us to note is that this is a process. So it's not one singular conversation that I'm preparing for, but there's different types of information that I want to have ready as we're having different conversations. And so you each talked about whether you're on campus doing recruiting or even in that initial conversation, is that there's more of a screening process. And so if we could talk a little more about what's the type of information that students should have prepared for that screening process, and what are the type of questions that you're looking for?
So I'd say for us, it's generally around the team member fit on the initial screening session. So I mentioned before, maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes, depending on where we are. It's interesting because where I came from before, GPA at US Bank mattered a little bit more. Major mattered a little bit more. Within Mortenson, engineering, and there's a broad amount of engineering opportunities, but we also hire for things called business services. So, finance, accounting, IT as well. But I'd say initially with the screening, what we're really looking to do is to get a general team member fit. Do you understand the industry? Do you understand the organization? Can you communicate well? And do we feel like initially you're a student who could come in and play an important role on some of the cool projects that we're working on?
I think at 3M, we follow the same kind of model. We're looking for a fit within our culture. We generally look for strong communicators. Collaboration is huge within our culture and how we work, especially with us being such a complex organization. So we really look for a lot of the communication and teamwork skills as well. My advice to you would really be honing in on that elevator pitch for yourself and kind of figuring out what that looks like, because as mentioned before, these are very short. In a lot of cases, 5 minutes can be generous because we're doing all day career affairs and we're seeing 300 to 500 candidates in 8 hours. So having that pitch nailed down, and I think also having some research on the company as well, so you're kind of well informed of what they do and what opportunities specifically they're looking for. One of the most frustrating things for us is the people who just come and say, so what's 3M all about? And like, what jobs do you have to offer me? Because that takes a lot of time from us to explain that to them versus those that say, I'm specifically interested in these positions and here's how I can help you.
And I'll go along with what Richard and Ellen have already talked about too, is that, in the public accounting world, for what we do, we are very much a client serving business. So, while it's important that someone understands debits and credits, we're going to expect you will have learned that in school. But then the soft skills are, quite frankly, arguably the most important thing. Can you communicate? Can you collaborate? And we'll start feeling this out as we have an opportunity to speak or meet with someone. So we really encourage people to to be open, tell us about yourself, and what are your interests? How can we help you do the things that you're looking to do? And when it comes to the campus activities that happen, again, really trying to get a feel for, are you personable? Are you open? Things of that nature. So those are some things I think about just immediately right off the bat.
Yeah, so I'll kind of be echoing that sentiment that like the soft skill kind of screening, I think is that biggest part of that first interaction, of that first 5-minute conversation or phone call. Ellen mentioned that elevator pitch. That's definitely something that I think is really important in those first interactions. And I think with upturnships in particular, we don't expect people to have that right off the bat on a screening call because we want to help you develop them. So for us, it's more so gauging your motivation, your interest, and your enthusiasm, because we don't want somebody to represent our program who is going to be passive in their in that experience. We want people who are going to be go-getters. And then on the recruitment side of things, when I've worked with tech recruitment, a lot of times that soft skill development is one of the biggest things that they're looking for, because there's a lot of people who can code, but there's not a lot of people who can get along with people on a team or can communicate complex concepts to people. So sometimes it's not exactly what it is that you're saying in that elevator pitch. It's more so are you saying it well? How are you articulating yourself? And what are you getting across in the limited time that you have?
Excellent. Thank you each for sharing. And I think you each hit on an important thing of talking about soft skills and the fact that we're doing this over a computer right now. We're meeting virtually, and so we don't have the same environment. Would love to know if you have any advice around that, of how do I show up best when we're only having this limited virtual connection?
So Matt, are you talking more on the screening side, interview side, all the above?
All the above. Any and all advice you have for us today.
Sounds good. So the first thing that I would say, and I was just talking to some of the chief students over the last couple of days, giving them some tips as we did some mock interviews. The first thing that I recommend each of you think about is before talking or thinking about the tactics, like what to say, how to say it, what to listen to, what not to listen to, I always recommend you starting to think about what are the top 5 things that I want the interviewer to know about me by the time the interview is done. So instead of thinking about, hey, the interviewer is interviewing me, I want you to think about what is it that I want to come across? And I would literally write those 5 things down. What are those personal characteristics? What are those stories that people have said, wow, you really do well at this? And then I would attach a personal story to each of those 5 things that you're willing to share, because it's the story that we remember. Anyone can say I'm a great communicator. Anyone can say I'm a great leader. Anyone can say that I am a team player, but the more you can tell specific stories that align to it, students that I talked to 5 years ago, I remember some of the specific stories they told me that really kind of cemented in my mind. So that's one thing that I would really recommend, especially in a virtual environment.
Kind of similar.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, kind of similar to what Richard was saying. I usually, when I'm working with students, will say, you don't exactly know what they're going to ask and you don't know what the conversation is going to look like. So the best thing that you can do is prepare your ammunition. So like having 3 work experiences or 3 college experiences or just anything that is a complex enough experience that you could answer a ton of different questions on. So it's like, I have story A, B, and C. And if you're looking for some soft skill question, I know that B and C are the best for that. Oh, are they going to be looking for technical knowledge? Okay, well, A and B are experiences where I have technical knowledge. Is it about disagreeing with a supervisor? I can talk about story C, but having all those in the back of your mind so that regardless of what the question is, you always are posing your answers in A, B, or C context so that you don't have to ever feel like you're coming up with something on the spot because you're only focusing on those 3.
I'm going to approach this from a little bit of a technical aspect since we are virtual, and every company and every school and everybody I've talked to so far is using different platforms, which has made our jobs as recruiters really fun, trying to figure out all of the technologies and the potential issues with them and how they operate and things like that. So one, I think, is if you can test the technology ahead of time so you understand what your capabilities are. Make sure you're connected to a strong Wi-Fi signal if you are doing video interviews. Make sure you're in a quiet area with a relatively clean background, or that you can kind of blur the background. I know we've seen all kinds of levels of kind of casual informalness, and I think that you have to tailor to yourself personally, because I think the most important thing is to be authentic. And then I guess in addition to that, in terms of approaching those interviews, and the feedback we've been getting from our teams that have been doing both this like kind of in booth screenings that they would have done in person and some of the interviews, some have found it actually much more personable because they do kind of get to see the candidate in their home environment, so to speak, and they're having that interaction. Some of the candidates tend to be more comfortable, and others feel it's less. And I think that's a personal preference with the recruiters and how the candidates are coming across in terms of nerves and being comfortable. So I think that's the other thing to pay attention to as well is kind of how comfortable you are and how a lot of times where this was previously a phone interview and you didn't have to school your face as much, which I am super guilty of myself. And now I'm constantly thinking of how does my face look and what does that come across as in these video interviews. So that's something maybe to practice with too, is just kind of facial expressions and not like furrowing your eyebrows or something as you're thinking, or different stuff like that.
You know, what I feel like I just heard from all 3 of you too is that arguably the biggest thing is be prepared, right? Be prepared. Don't walk into a potential interview not knowing what you might need to say or might want to talk about. Testing technology ahead of time is going to save you a lot of pain and angst if something's not working, and just being prepared with those talking points, I think, is the biggest thing. So they all hit the nail on the head. And ultimately, again, it comes down to being prepared, being ready.
And at Upturnships, we kind of are talking a lot with our employers, trying to create more inclusive workspaces and try to kind of tackle bias in the application process and in the interview process and things like that too. And I think the less things that you can have in your screen, the less things there are for somebody to like form an opinion about. And whether or not it's like good that they're forming an opinion about something, whether it's bad, like if you just don't have it, then they just can't form an opinion. So a blank wall is better than something that may be questionably like offensive or questionably like political or something like that, because you don't know where that other person's coming from in their background. And you don't want that to be a reason why there's a hurdle in your experience.
Yeah, thank you each. I double down on the preparation and just accolades to each of you on the call today. This is a Friday afternoon and you're spending time to get prepared for these opportunities. So that's exactly what we're doing today. And we talked about learning about the organization. If you know who you're going to talk to, you can look them up on LinkedIn. Learn about the individuals and organizations that you're most interested in. We also learned so far about really making sure that I'm able to demonstrate knowledge in whichever space that I'm interested in moving it to. We talked about having strong communication and making sure that mannerisms come across. Just a really quick question then, would want to know from the four of you on, does my background matter? That I know it's possible to blur the space or, put in kind of a white screen behind myself. Any recommendations or preferences on that?
I think if I'm understanding your question correctly too, I think from what Ellen had just talked about, test it out beforehand. I'd say less is more than likely. So yeah, just work through that, be smart about it.
I would double down on what Ellen said too, in terms of making sure you test before. So someone I was interviewing 2 days ago, literally like, I think 15 seconds before our interview, she finally got everything to work. And for the first 5 minutes of the conversation, she was so flustered and she was very apologetic. And I understood the technology glitch, but it really threw her off the interview because she wasn't adequately prepared. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, and for me, background in terms of what's there isn't as essential as trying to avoid people walking in and out of it or having pets come in and out of it, different things like that in the background noise. I think and generic or kind of neutral background where, again, you're trying to avoid anything that's maybe potentially offensive or things like that is good, but something having like what I have versus having what Brett has doesn't bother me personally. It's, again, that avoiding potential distractions coming in and out, whether that's people or pets or other random things as well.
Yeah, and we work with students who, especially during COVID, there might be, 5 or 6 people living in like a small living situation, and we understand that like not everyone has the access to like an individual room for them to be doing yeah, exactly, an individual room to be having their interviews in and stuff like that. So if you're able to create like some sort of space, if you're able to talk to your family, talk to your roommates about like just this 1 hour not being active and not being moving around, it can really make all that much more of a difference. If you are in a situation, in a context where you don't really have a lot of options, I think that it's fair, and maybe I would love to hear the other panelists' ideas too, but I think it's fair to just name that and just provide the context. Say, I'm sorry, you might hear some things in the background. I, live and take care of family. It's something I can't avoid at this time. I don't think anyone's going to really hold that against you, but if it's something that doesn't go addressed, then they might, think something that isn't the case or, whatever.
Yeah, I think that, oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I think that's a great point too. I think with the pandemic, people working from home, all the video stuff, I think not only us as recruiters and interviewers, but hopefully people are going to have grace too, because as you just talk about that, like I don't know what you can hear on my end, but like I have the dump truck picking up trash cans outside and it's really loud for me. I don't know if you can hear it. And then on the other side of my door here, I have 4 kids. My wife is really doing her best to help corral them and just keep them happy. So I always preface it with people that I'm doing interviews with. I'm like, hey, my 7-year-old is doing schooling from home. So if you hear some noises, you'll know why. So I think it is okay to preface that. And again, hopefully the people that you're going to be meeting with are going to have some grace and obviously understand just based on the situation today.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing. The forewarning or the potential forewarning is always helpful. We also, as part of our training this year, intentionally reminded our interviewers that the ideal environment doesn't exist for a lot of students. And it's just not possible, whether that's because they have to share Wi-Fi with 6 people or they've got roommates or what have you. And so we've asked them to be conscious of that and try not let that influence as well. And that's something that we kind of got feedback on early on from some of the universities to help prep. And so we've been trying to incorporate that into our training and making sure that they're not using that as a potential bias for the candidates and how the interviews are going.
Thank you each. And I know a question just came in, really important, I think, as well. As hiring managers, if you're suggesting a few windows of time for students to be meeting, would you say generally, is it an option for students to suggest a time that works better for their schedule? Or should they be picking, from options that are giving?
So with us, within our digital process, we actually allow for students to go back into the system and change times if they need to. So you can sign up for a time, sign up for a screening or an interview, but you'll get an email from us. You can go back into the system and change the time. So we've built that into our process. So it's perfectly fine on our end. I would say though, it shouldn't be 30 minutes before the screening or interview, or shouldn't be an hour. I would give it multiple hours before you make that request.
And to go along with that, I'd say days. If you have days to know that you're going to need to change that ahead of time, that would be even better. If you can't make something work during the timeframes that are suggested and you need to go back and request another time, be very specific around what times can work for you. Because if you come back to me and you just say, nope, that doesn't work, what else works for you? Well, that doesn't help me, because now I still don't know what does work for you. So be very specific in your request. And I think you'll be in good shape if you can do that.
And I think a lot of it comes down to intentionality too, where like, if it looks like there's stuff going on behind you that maybe like is going on just because you didn't let people know in your household what's going on, then that might come off a little bit worse than like, these are things going on behind that look like they need to be happening. I mean, this is just a personal, like, professional experience, but I was on a work call with one of my previous organizations, and one of my coworkers didn't see that her boyfriend was behind her cooking in their kitchen, and that was the back screen, and he was like shirtless cooking, and like it would look like something that could totally be avoidable, knowing that it was a very important meeting. Like, that conversation should have happened between them, and that they should have both been aware of the significance of the conversation we were having. So like, that just is something that could easily be avoided. But if it's something where like, your grandma is getting, walked by with somebody or something like that, no one's going to really hold that against you. But just trying to look like you're communicating, like you're being intentional about the experience.
Yeah, and I think getting back to the scheduling, it's important to remember that we're reaching out to you because we're interested in you. So we want to try and make it work with your schedule as well. We have 2 methods where we schedule depending on whether it's an interview or a phone screen and what the hiring manager prefers. So some of them are actually automated scheduling where we've blocked, say, an entire day and we're inviting the candidates, and then the candidates self-select which time works best for them. And if that case, your availability changes, you'll have to follow up with us and see what we can work out. In regards to kind of the second methodology, if the hiring manager reaches out and says, I have 2 hours on this day, 2 hours on this day, and 2 hours on that day, if you can make those work, I would recommend it. But if not, I think it's totally okay to say, those don't work due to class schedule or whatever other commitments I have. And then again, offer a couple of different windows as well. We want to try and fit everybody into our schedules, but we're busy recruiting. For 3M personally, we hire about 300 interns and 300 full-time a year, and are interviewing well beyond that 600 candidates, right, to get to that number. So there's only so much we can do in terms of scheduling and what commitments other people have. So be mindful of that, but also know that you do have some capability to request other times.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if we've touched on this quite yet, but in the case that you do need to change, it's important to be intentional about communicating why. So this year, we've had some students who were diagnosed with COVID, literally hours before, days before their interview, or family members that were. So feel free to be comfortable communicating the reasons behind it. And generally speaking, like Brett mentioned before, we understand what's going on this year. So as long as it's a good reason why you may need to make that change, it's perfectly fine.
Yeah,
and coming
thank you.
from the working with college students all the time, which I'm sure you all do as well, but like and you all know too, as college students, there's probably those people in your class who like will say that they can't make it because of this thing that happened, but it's always like an hour before class, or it's always an hour before the paper's due, or something like that. And like, while this might be the only time that you're making this exception and like canceling last minute or right before an opportunity with an employer, they might not assume that this is like your only time having done that, because of their interactions with lots of different other college students who may be a little bit more flaky and maybe cancel out last minute. So just try not to be that day of person canceling out on things, because that can look pretty bad.
Yeah, really have appreciated all this advice and talking about being planful, being intentional. And then also, if that does come up, I can picture it helps in how I frame it. So just as Richard said, telling why. If I'm really excited about this interview with Mortenson, share that. And, unfortunately, the time frame that I was given doesn't work, but I really want to take advantage of this opportunity. And so be emphasizing, there is that rationale on why you want to look for alternative times. So I do want to move on and talk about, what are some other common mistakes or learnings that you would say early professionals or students that are interviewing? As Ellen, I know you've talked about interviewing hundreds of, students. What are things that you've seen that we could be improving upon, or pitfalls to avoid?
I think one of the biggest things that people tend to be afraid of in an interview, and I'm guilty of this too, so I know I do it all the time, is when you're a candidate and you have to think about the question, there tends to be a silence, and people hate silence. And so I think a lot of times you will rush to put in that first answer that comes to your mind. And even if it's, a decent answer, you maybe don't frame it up the right way, or kind of ramble in getting to the meat of the answer. So I think the biggest advice I would always offer is take that minute, take that breath, and figure out how you want to answer the question and how you want to frame it up. And then kind of also think about your word choice and how that goes across too, because we as recruiters don't mind that at all. I think people get afraid that we do, and so they just jump in and start answering. And I do it all the time. When I interviewed, I did it, a lot. Even when I'm doing like informational interviews with people where there's less pressure, I tend to do that. So that would be my advice, I think, is that, and kind of a big mistake is like rushing through and then feeling like you maybe didn't answer your best, or the worst is always leaving the interview and having, oh, I should have brought up this point or that point, just minutes afterwards. And I think the other, I don't know if it's a faux pas or mistake, but I think the other big thing is typically you get to the question period where we're looking for you to kind of ask us questions about either the role or the company. And that helps us get to know you a little bit more personally too. And it's either that you maybe haven't prepped that time, or you just, again, are too nervous to think of questions or whatever. But I think it kind of sends a slightly weird message to us if you just go, no, I don't have any questions at this time, right? So that's the other thing I would say is prep a couple of questions. I always have a few standard ones, like, tell me about career development at this company. What does that look like? I'm really interested in this one piece of news about your company recently. Can you tell me more about how this role directly relates to that? There's kind of some canned answers you can think of that make you look like you really put in the time and research, which I'm sure you did. And you were thoughtful as well, while not having to think of anything too specific related to the job or to the company.
Yeah, that question window is like what I see as like one of the most golden like opportunities, because I feel like when someone's saying, do you have any questions? I don't hear like, what is your question? I hear like, how are you going to prove to me that you've learned about our company? So whenever I'm asking a question of an employer or a hiring manager, I tend to be asking questions I know the answer to, but that you can't answer on just on the website based, on that alone. but like, oh, I know that you guys really, do this really great training and development program with these rotations. What are the most popular like rotations that people, enjoy when they go through or something like that? So you're saying like, here's information I know, here's an advanced level question to show that I'm like thinking at that next level too or something.
Ellen mentioned really early on that people will say, ask, what do you know about 3M or X company? And they don't know anything, right? So I see that so often. Not only I primarily do experienced hire individuals, but it happens so often with people that are even experienced. So I think if you can come in, being able to talk about what you know about the company to begin with is going to be a great first step right off the bat. And then, when it comes to the part about, do you have any questions? If you feel like you're locking up and you don't know what to say or what have you, whoever you're interviewing with, pose a question to them, because people are about their own experiences, right? Because historically, people love talking about themselves or their own experiences. So if you find yourself locking up, think about the person you're speaking with, and you can simply ask them, obviously, how long have you been here? What's your experience been like? So again, that can kind of give you a quick little reminder. If you are locking up, talk to the person you're speaking with about their own experiences.
I think the other thing with the questions too, and why they're so important, is while the company is interviewing you, you also have to assess if they're a good fit for you as maybe a long-term employer, right? Maybe for your career, or even just for this next immediate step. And so if you get an offer, how can you make the decision if you kind of don't have all the information, right? So I would say no question is a stupid question, but you may want to be careful about how you're wording them. So think about that, but also kind of think about too, what do I really need in terms of making a decision if it comes to that point, and how can I get that information?
I think that's good, Ellen. And the one thing that I would add to this, especially I've been blessed with the opportunity to connect with Wallen for the last, I think 4 or 5 years now, and seeing lots of students come through the program. And the one thing I appreciated about Wallen students specifically is that y'all come from underrepresented backgrounds and do some phenomenal things within the Twin Cities area. And so the one biggest mistake that I would say, above and beyond the tactics, taking it more to a philosophical level, is your level of confidence and level of belief in yourself prior to coming to the interview. Because I can tell you, I can sense that within the first 5 seconds. Within the first 2 seconds of a student coming up and having a conversation, if they really believe in themselves, if they really believe that they have the capability to do the job well. So like Ellen mentioned a second ago, which was a great point, you're interviewing the company as well to a degree. And the one thing that you guys probably know is some of the best athletes in the world, before a game, are going to close their eyes for 10, 20, 30 minutes and envision themselves getting to the spot of shooting a free throw, putting in golf, whatever it might be. So even for me today, when I'm stepping into something that might make me a little bit nervous, I don't know how it's going to work, I'm going through my pregame routine. I'm imagining how people are going to dress. I'm guessing what they're going to say. And that makes me so much more prepared for the opportunity. So I would say your confidence in yourself, number one, is going to really drive home who you are as a person too.
Hello. Thank you all for being here, first off, and answering these questions. My name is Untitled. I go to the U of M, and my question is around a resume. And a lot of the questions that I have is around what should my resume look like. So from the actual look and feel to what I include. So if you don't mind if you don't mind telling us like 2 or 3 characteristics that you would like to see in every resume, and one big mistake that you constantly see happening when you guys are examining resumes. Thank you.
I think from a lot of the resumes I've seen come from like the Carlson School of Business at the U, they're typically broken into 3 sections. One's going to be, any work experience that you might have, obviously the education piece. And then the third part's usually like, volunteer or community type activities, or perhaps sports or things of that nature. So that's generally what I've seen from, again, some of the other students at the U of M in Carlson are broken into those 3 sections. You know, something I would encourage you to not do is don't put your address on a resume. I think it's great to have your name, you know, a phone number, email, maybe a URL link to your LinkedIn profile, and then you could even put the city if you want, but don't get specific in address. It's not needed. I think there's an opportunity for bias to occur if someone recognizes, you know, where around the cities that you might be coming from, if for some reason someone has, you know, a bias that they technically might not even realize at the same time. So no need for a specific address.
The one thing that I would say, based on the fact that we all see so many resumes, the education piece should be on the top. Education, major, year in school. The quicker we can see that, the quicker we can go through the resume and better understand what everything else looks like. So that would be number 1. Number 2, the other thing that I told a student yesterday, if you're a junior or senior, there's no need to put your high school information within your resume. That's not needed. The third thing I would say is make sure you're giving as many examples. And what you may want to say is, I did this, which resulted in, and then fill in the very last piece of that there. Because again, anyone can say I was a good leader. Anyone can say I worked in the project, but what's going to separate you from someone else is what did it result in? That's really going to help us out a lot.
Yeah, and I think to go along with that too, I mean, any sort of quantifiable data that you can give with what Richard's talking about is going to be key. So how did you make an improvement or make something more efficient or what have you? If you can pull that in, that would be great.
I'd agree with all that, especially the quantifiable information. And I know in some spaces that's hard to do, like HR, it's really hard to quantify something.
Yep.
But I think you can still include, you know, made improvements that resulted in increased customer satisfaction or increased compliance in the case of HR, right? So I think quantifiable as much as you can is hugely helpful, especially if you can kind of include, without going into too much detail, maybe like the size of the company as well and how that relates to maybe a larger company, right? So 3M, for example, is, and I'm going to get the number slightly off, like 93,000 employees, and I think it's like 32 billion in revenue a year. So that's very different than working for a much smaller company like a mom and pop shop, right? But you can still say, I made a 25% improvement in this and here's how. So I think that helps as well. The other big thing I always encourage is readability. So do not use super tiny font. Do not use a weird font. Make sure there's plenty of white space. I've worked in IT, in finance and engineering and research and development on the PhD side. So I've seen CVs and you know, multiple pages and things like that. I've seen design portfolios where a big part of that is actually creating your own resume with your own graphics and your own icons and all of that. So format specifically doesn't bother me or faze me in any way, shape, or form, but having it readable is key, because we often spend only just a few minutes, if that, looking at the resume, making that first decision. And then the biggest mistake I typically see are typos. You know, I've seen Word documents often come across in funky kind of ways in the application systems. So if you can convert it to a PDF and then upload the PDF, I recommend that as well. And then the last thing I would say is don't include an objective. It's fine to include a summary, but so often we see the objective is a way for students to tailor the resume to say, I care specifically about your role, and then putting the wrong resume into mine. So I've gotten ones where it's like, to obtain a chemical engineering internship at Dow when they're applying at 3M, or they're full-time, but they still use kind of some information from their internship resume. So it's to obtain an internship in 2020, right? So I think objectives aren't needed, and they're often usually where people make the most mistakes in terms of not catching like a typo or something specific to a role, because oftentimes they will tailor a couple of different resumes based on what type of roles they're looking for.
Yeah, I would like to piggyback off the objective statement. We tell all of our students to remove their objective statements because for the most part, they usually boil down to, I want a job at your company. And they know that because you're submitting a resume. So one of the things that I always like to tell students to do too is that, like, instead of tailoring an objective, even if you're applying to another marketing firm for a similar role, the job descriptions probably contain different buzzwords and contain different, like, keywords that they're going to be looking for. So read that job description and make sure that when you're reading your resume over, your descriptions and your line items underneath the experiences are going to touch on what they want specifically, as opposed to just marketing in general or like finance in general. Because if this is a role that's like, marketing, like analysis, there's, I don't know, there's like a very technical version of marketing, but then there could be like social media and communications type stuff. So like, you really want to emphasize whatever those specific technical skills or highlighted skills that they have in their job description, and have those representative in the language that you have below each experience. Even if it's just changing 3 or 4 words, it might make a difference.
There's a question here for us panelists about the 1-page resume requirement. I would tell you my initial thought is that I'm not concerned if you're 1-page or 2-page for that matter. Now, with that said, and you probably don't have enough experience yet to worry about it, but I've seen some resumes come through where it's like 4, 5, 6 pages and it's dense. It's difficult to get through. But me personally, I'm not super concerned about it, as long as the information is, value add and helpful.
I'd say that from my perspective, if it's substantive, it makes all the sense in the world to have it there. If it's 1 page, 1.5 pages, we're perfectly fine with that. Now, if it's fluff just to add more, then I would keep it to 1 page, but a little bit over 1, perfectly fine with that.
I agree with that. And it comes back down to formatting too, right? If you're to force it to 1 page, having it to go to too small font or something, go ahead and make it a little bit larger and go on to that 2nd page. To me, again, readability is the biggest thing, because we're going through hundreds of these in, very quick time frames. So being able to get the information we need is critical.
Yeah, I like to say, if there's a 2nd page, it better be worth it. Like, I don't want to read the 2nd page if it's going to be experiences that are like, like completely unrelated to the work that you're applying for.
I'm loving all the feedback. Thank you. And so as we talk about the word substantive, as I can barely say that word, and really both talking about the experience and what was the result of that experience, and ideally making that quantifiable, I think that also goes really well into the interview. And that's the same format we want to use. We've talked about creating SMART goals and using that response style. So always emphasize that as well. And I do want to spend the last couple minutes, as we've talked a lot today about preparation, and would just love to hear from each of you on how can students be best prepared in learning about your organizations, the roles, if there's opportunities for informational interviews. If I'm doing independent research, should I be looking on LinkedIn for individuals with similar jobs? Any ideas or advice on how best to conduct that research would be beneficial?
I think to begin with, if you don't have one, get on LinkedIn, set up a profile. As you set up your profile, you can make it very basic, maybe make it look like how your resume would read perhaps. And as you get more comfortable with LinkedIn, you can tailor it as you see fit. Me personally, for me, I was a 1st-generation college student. Like, I had no guidance. I really did. I truly had to figure out everything on my own. And the way I learned was through outreach, through asking questions, through introducing myself to strangers. And a lot of that, strangers via LinkedIn. And, in terms of getting informational interviews, certainly work with your school to see, maybe who some alumni are, or to go further, you can search you can search for alumni on LinkedIn and attempt to maybe send them a message, and again, be very specific in your request and your outreach to them about why you're contacting them, why you're maybe hoping to spend 15 minutes on the phone with them. I encourage you to be bold and go for it, because if you don't ask, nothing will ever happen. And at worst, someone's either going to not reply or say no. And if that's the case, then you move on. A quick little story. I have a friend who he was an entrepreneurship major in the cities. And again, he was bold and he was just kind of blasting out, again, very well written specific messages to leaders in the Twin Cities community. And he ended up landing an in-person interview with the former CEO of Best Buy. And he had no, I think, I forget his name now, Hubert. And he had no connection to Hubert. He just reached out and Hubert was like, yeah, I'll spend time with you. He's like, no one asked me to, like no students asked me to do this. So I think to some degree, again, be bold and do the outreach and be okay with rejection at the same time. So.
Yeah. I'd also say on top of LinkedIn, if you don't have a Handshake profile, that's also going to be incredibly important for you. Not all companies I know utilize that, but I know we do now. Companies that I know locally are also using that tool. So if you don't have a Handshake profile set up, that's another way. In fact, a lot of college recruiting teams will go there before they'll go to LinkedIn nowadays. So that's also really important for you. The other thing, and I'm glad you said it, Matt, the cool thing about Wallen is you guys have so many resources and volunteers who can bridge the connection between where you are and some other organizations that you would like to connect with. If you do it blind, sometimes you'll get a hit like Brett's story, which was awesome a second ago, but other times a blind email that comes to us, we're going to set it aside. But if there's a human relationship in between that, that's also going to be really helpful for you.
And I think that's really important to consider who is in your network. And I think a lot of times for first generation college students in particular, I think sometimes we can think that our network is smaller than it actually is. And if you're thinking about it, add your professors on LinkedIn, add anybody who comes into any of your classes to do a presentation on LinkedIn, anybody who's having an interaction with you, even in the slightest bit, or that you can make that personal connection to say like, oh, hey, I saw you speak, even if it's at the U and you have a class of 100 people, you came in and talked at my class and I just really wanted to add you on LinkedIn just to maybe connect in the future. Those people are going to be more willing to want to help you. And if all the people in your network, for the most part, want to see people that they know or that they are connected to succeed. So don't be afraid to ask to do an informational interview or to ask them if they know somebody relevant to a field that you're looking for. I think informational interviews are the biggest tool whatsoever in kind of the career development process. And I think every informational interview that you have should end with the question of, do you know anybody else who I could talk to that might be relevant to this industry or this role? And in being specific and not asking for an interview or asking for a job or anything like that, because that just shows up as sometimes as entitled. So you're just more so asking for the connection. A lot of times someone will connect you to somebody who they know with the intent of them potentially knowing that they might be looking to hire. And you don't need to ever say that outright.
I think too, a lot of people try and do informational interviews with decision makers or who are viewed as decision makers, so potential hiring managers, recruiters. I think a missed opportunity a lot of times is school alumni who either had an internship or just started their career in the company or in the industry that you want to work in. I think those folks, one, have more time to do informational interviews, and you already have the connection of going to the same school, so you may know them already, or I think, it's a much more natural connection to say, hey, I'm also a student at, whatever university, interested in this company or interested in this role. Do you have some time to tell me about your experiences so far? You'll probably have better luck with those types of interviews and also get more honest feedback in some cases about the company and about the role, because there's less pressure of having to portray the company in a positive light or to kind of respond to questions in a certain way, which we often kind of coach our recruiters on, right? We always say, be honest, be authentic, but there are certain points we try and get them to make and certain things we try and make sure they get across in terms of selling the company. And so I think people who have just started with the company are less likely to feel like they have to adhere to those and are probably going to give you some pretty honest feedback too.
The one thing that I would add, if anything else, from a Wallen perspective, I know in communicating with a lot of students, folks feel like informational interviews are asking for them. It's kind of a burden. understand what it's like from our perspective. I think we are all the panelists will probably agree. In backroom conversations across companies in the Twin Cities and across the country, the one biggest thing as it relates to talent right now is how do we diversify? How do we get more folks of color, women into our organizations? So to the extent that you guys are comfortable, confident, and reach out, understand it might feel like a burden on your from your perspective, but for us, we are looking for students like you to come in and to assume internship and full-time opportunities. So that's the one thing. The other thing that Matt mentioned before, which is a really good point via text here, making sure that you're thanking the people is very important. Now, there's two schools of thought on this, and I know panelists, you may have a different perspective on this, so I'm sorry. There's a school of thought that says when you interview with someone, you should always write a handwritten note. Some people believe that. And what I've seen is one specific scenario a couple of years ago, there were two students vying for one internship opportunity. One wrote the handwritten note, but it took them 2 days to get the note to the interviewer. We had a day to make the decision on the interview. The other student typed an email response, and that student ended up getting the interview opportunity. So sometimes what like best practices is, if you're thinking about reaching out to someone, a handwritten note plus an email may suffice. You should think about that for sure.
And keep in mind that during COVID, so typically you would identify the mailing address for the company and then address it to the person, and then that'll eventually will get to them. But during COVID, most people are working from home. So the handwritten note thing, personally, I find a little obsolete for right now, but I do really, really like that send an email within 24 hours and then mail out a handwritten note within 48 kind of thing.
Thank you so much. I know we are almost at the hour. If we have time for just one more quick question.
Okay, hi. My name is Min. I'm actually one of the scholar advisors. Thank you again for all being here. I have kind of a bigger picture question for all of you guys. I have a lot of students that sometimes are under the impression that like more academic credentials, whether it's like double majoring, triple minoring, will set them apart in the application and hiring stage. So I'm wondering, when you guys are looking at applications, how much weight are you really putting into what minors they have, what majors they have, or is it more so you've met the basic requirements and now we're focusing more on like your experiences and the kind of skills that you're bringing to the position? Thank you.
I think for CLA, again, knowing that we're really focused on, accounting students specifically, we're primarily just focused on, are you an accounting student? Anything extra is maybe nice, but I wouldn't see that swaying us necessarily unless it was an additional degree or a minor in something that is going to go along with the accounting work. So like for us, again, most people that come in are accounting majors, but if someone is an accounting major and they have a management information systems degree or a minor with that, they're up even a little bit higher. So I would make sure that those additional majors or minors are going to coincide well with what they're targeting or what they're looking to do.
I think from my perspective, minors matter less. What matters more are the skills you're bringing to the table. So I've seen students who are liberal arts majors, but had .NET experience on the IT side or understood Bluebeam within construction. So it isn't necessarily the nature of the major or minor, it's the skill set. And here's why, just a quick tip, why Handshake is really important for us and for many of my peers is we can search for the specific skill that you may have based on what we're looking for. So it might not always be the major or minor. If you have a specific skill set, for example, within Excel, it was pivot tables when I was at US Bank. Like if you could actually do that, you were a cut above those who weren't able to accomplish that within your interview, or if you could talk about that within your screening. So to me, skill sets matter more than the actual minor.
I think for us, we look for specific majors to help winnow the field down, right? Again, we can have on one requisition several hundred people apply. So it's a first way to cut and look at maybe a smaller pool. So in that regard, having a major or minor may help you if your first major isn't a direct correlation. So maybe we're looking for computer science and your first major is information systems, but then you have a computer science minor, and that may help you come to the next level. But I think more often than not, aside from just doing that cut down, and even in some cases like that, we'll pull back and kind of keep looking through the candidates. It really gets back to skill sets and how you're using them. I think where majors and minors are most important are freshmen and sophomores, because at that point you typically don't have a lot of experience in a practical application to pull on. So you're using the major and minors to showcase what theoretical experience you have with a particular field. And so that's where it's going to kind of come into play more than maybe a junior or senior who has some previous work experience. And that's typically what we're looking for at that point, is that experience or skill set that you have.
Yeah. So hopefully you're hearing that majors absolutely do matter. I have a lot of students who ask that question, does my major matter at all? The answer is unequivocally yes, it does. It does.
Yeah, and you also have to think about the different industries too. Like if you're going to be an engineering student, you have to almost probably be an engineering major. But like when I was doing like tech recruitment, when they're looking for software developers, like, systems engineers, stuff like that, like as long as you have experience in it, or as long as like you've taken like some coding classes or something, as long as you know the language and you know that you can get the work done, they don't really even care if you have an undergrad at some the right undergrad degree at some companies. But it's also going to depend on the size of the company too. Ellen's looking at hundreds and hundreds of applications. They might filter through a major, but if you're looking at a startup company, they might be looking more for like taking a deeper look into the person and their experiences. So it all is going to depend on the types of companies and stuff you're applying to as well.
Thank you so much for all the information, the advice. We really appreciate it. We are at time. Do just want to go quick around if any of you do have any final advice, wisdom you want to share, but really we just want to thank you each for your time today. And we encourage all students be connecting with our speakers on LinkedIn as we talked about.
I guess last thing I'd leave with is I think the big thing from today is be prepared. You don't know what's going to come at you, so really be prepared and be ready for what may or may not come. Just want to also echo, I'm glad that you all are part of the Wallen program. It sounds like a great program, and again, hopefully help you to excel and jump out into the working world here shortly, and good luck to all of you.
One thing that I would say, go ahead, Luciano, after you.
Go ahead, Richard.
All right. As I mentioned before, companies are looking and seeking for diverse talent across the board. But I think the one thing we didn't talk about as it relates to being prepared is understanding what success really looks like at the end of the day. So one of my favorite questions to ask is, if you were to take me a year from now and I knocked it out of the park, what exactly would that look like? And I would encourage you to ask companies questions like that, to have them tell you exactly what success means in that specific role, and then add 20% to what they just said. Because that's how you really start to knock it out of the park,